Good evening. You're watching or listening to Access Humboldt, either Channel 12, or you are listening to us on KZZH, or possibly watching us on the internet. This is Redwood Wonk. We are taking a little bit of a different approach today. We have invited Scott Binder, who is a community activist locally and has, we believe, a bit of political savvy. We are going to discuss today the decline of political discourse in this country. And I'm going to let each of them kind of speak to it first. But, I guess one of the questions is, where do you believe it started? And we've never, it's never, political discourse has never always been friendly. I mean, you look back at the Lincoln Douglas debates, they weren't polite all the time. There were some pretty, mean things they said to each other. But there's a point where it becomes so toxic that we aren't even talking, we aren't even arguing with each other, And I think about going back to the Buckley-Gore debate, the famous one where Gore called him a crypto-fascist or a crypto-Nazi, sorry, and Gore and Buckley threatened to punch him, and things like that have happened, but we don't have anything. Buckley actually, as arrogant as he could be, very much valued discussion across political lines. His show Firing Line, he interviewed people of all different politics. He often had groups of panels of four. A lot of times it would be four conservatives against four liberals, but not always. When he had the drug war thing, he was on the side against the drug war, and then Representative Pat Schroeder was there advocating for Reagan's drug war. It was a very interesting discussion, and it was framed in such a way that we all would think about it a little bit. We would listen. We would could respect the opinions and the views of the other side and how it's being expressed. That has kind of disappeared. Around the same time in the 1980s, we also had a show called Crossfire come on, but it was only a half hour long, and it was really about each side making their points and, getting their jabs in. It really wasn't very productive, and in fact, Jon Stewart brought it to their attention shortly before that show went under. On Fox News, you used to have Hannity and Combs, but Combs disappeared, and there were a number of shows like this. There really is no show that's dedicated towards cross-ideological debate, and it is ideologies now. It's not even just, I have conservative tendencies or I have liberal tendencies. It's like you're in a group, like a club, right? You speak for your gang, and I think that probably started with the advent of talk radio, cable news, and the internet. But I don't want to blame the formats. I want to take a look at specifically the things that happened, and I actually trace the particular decline that we're talking about back to the 1980s, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I want to give our new guest, Scott Binder, a chance to address what he thinks is, what he thinks the problems are with discourse and where we've been. And then later in the show, we'll talk about where we can go.
Well, hi, guys. Thanks for inviting me here. And it's a pleasure to take part in this. And I'm a big advocate for fairness and for people not shouting one another down, for people being actually civil. And I'm focusing mainly on the online area and the online arena. And I saw civil discourse go down when people would quit having their conversations face to face, and they were able to go on the internet and post anonymously. I participated a long time ago back in the old Usenet days. I don't know what your internet background is, but Usenet, and it turned into Yahoo groups, and then now it's something else. But there was a capability of semi or full anonymity on there, and people would really start to show levels of uncivility that you wouldn't see face to face in
Right.
a discussion. And even after that, if even now, if you run into somebody that you argue with online, like on a Facebook group or something or another, and you see them uptown, you know them personally or gone to school with them, it's like nothing ever happened. You know, it's all, hi, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. How's the kids? Blah, blah, blah. But when you get back online, it's the same mess. And so I blame anonymity, the keyboard warrior syndrome, and the fact that somebody can't reach out and punch you in the face over the internet or the airwaves.
Thank you. Chuck, you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think that what we're seeing is that we are in an era of sorting. Our society has sorted itself out based on identities of all sorts, whether it's political identity or social identity, regional identity, whatever it happens to be. And the result of that is that the information that flows within the sorted society that we now have is in identity-based silos that just reinforce preconceived notions and ideas. And within that environment, one side has now chosen to propagate its own mythology, and including election fraud and fealty to one person in the name of Trump, at the expense of truth and facts. And since we can no longer agree on facts and what our shared reality is, it means our discussions really can't take place in a meaningful way, that is, or in a respectful or civilized way. And so, you know, what we see is those who are not on board with the mythology that exists now are exiled. And we saw that with what happened to Liz Cheney today. And, you know, so my question now is, will those who are being exiled, especially on the right, reemerge? And if so, when and in what form? So, you know, even though Liz Cheney and I would disagree on just about every aspect of policy, I'm rooting for her because I think I sense from her that she is interested in returning to a fact-based political dialogue of the sort that we would recognize because we've seen it before. So I'm hoping that this is a beginning for her of something new.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I do think that we do need to look at the medium. I mean, there are a few things about the internet, as Scott pointed out, anonymity. Yeah, it's a big thing if you don't know who it is, and I've been amazed too when I've had people attack me on my blog, and the rest kind of thought, man, what is this problem? Then I meet them in person, and they're like a pussycat. It's it's a totally different reality. Like, is this really the person? It is pretty amazing. And the other thing is that with the instantaneous nature of communication. In the old days, we might write a letter and we might be really angry, and write a letter either to somebody or a newspaper or something else. And then we put it on our desk, and then we get up the next morning and think, oh, do I really want to send that? Maybe I'll do it a little bit different now that I've calmed down. Here you got the send button, you pound it out on your keyboard and it's gone. And then you can't take it back if you're on a forum, right? So it's really something, and I have to say, I've gotten caught up in it too, because I like to feel like I'm clever. And so I come up with a good quip. It's real hard. But what it does is it makes, at best, if I'm going to quote unquote win an argument, I'm just making somebody feel stupid at the best. And that's not going to make them think like me or change their mind or bring them to me. It's just going to make them at best feel bad about themselves, and at worst just completely disregard me. Even if I've won that argument. And it's all about winning the argument, except you don't ever win it. It doesn't happen. There's no end to it. Nobody very few. I've actually seen it happen a few times, but very few times do you say, you've raised a really good point there. I want to think about that. I mean, it does happen, not often, but it's so I agree. I also do think that we do have our clubs that we identify with. We've all got our own media now. We don't have to watch the same thing. It used to be Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it was, right? It just but now everybody's got their own media, and the media caters to what they want, right? Which is to not to learn new perspectives and to be challenged in their perspectives, but to validate their perspectives and so that they can just cheer on what's being said. And that's really bad. We do not have any crosstalk shows left, with the exception of one show called The Rising on the Hill online. I recommend it. It's her name is Crystal Ball. I'm forgetting what his name is. He's a little bit more conservative than she is, and they have discussions and they're respectful all the time. But we don't have anything like that anymore, and we need it desperately. But I was going to go into the history of how I thought this happened. I think discourse kind of has went down starting in the 60s. I do think on the left, we really have to account for the judgmentalism that we push on people when they don't think, and the labeling of people. The use of the word racist to describe everything that we disagree with, or some other ism. I mean, the left was the king of isms. You could, if you wanted to basically disregard somebody, you find some sort of category, put an ism at the end of it, and you can make one up if you don't have one, right? I think that has been a problem with our end of the discourse. I think on the right, of late, there are people who are real angry about very real problems, and maybe are blaming some of the wrong people for the problems that they have. I don't know if either of you've had a chance to see it, but there's a Saturday Night Live skit called Black Jeopardy, and there was on one of them, Tom Hanks played a guy with a MAGA hat. And the Black Jeopardy, of course, is questions that you get questions that supposedly only Black working class people can answer. But Tom Hanks is doing fine, right? And he's actually impressing everybody else on the stage because they have a lot in common in terms of what the problems they see in the world, the problems they experience in the world, until it got to the last category, lives that matter, and then the host says, "Oh, it was good while it lasted, Doug." And it shows that the point of that was that there's a lot of similarities. We have a lot more similarities than we have differences, and you get to a certain point, and then all of a sudden the eyes glaze over. I've got family who won't watch these videos because they just don't. It's not in their medium. They are supporting Trump. They're supporting a very specific, a medium and very specific ideology. They did not want to spend an hour watching this because it doesn't reinforce their anger. Again, on the left, we've got our own problems too, as I've outlined, and so we got to find some way to connect and talk. I'm not even talking about reaching solutions to problems, but just restoring a sense of, we do come at it from different levels. We come from different places. We have different life experiences, and we've read different things and we've been inspired by different things, but we have similar issues, and we need to work together on them and figure it out.
Well, I really don't know. I think that you said quite a bit, and there's quite a bit that I agree with there. And it is awfully sad that people are labeled now, and that people's, the primary test of an argument anymore isn't the quality of thinking, but the cultural, or whatever race they are, and that is considered first. It's the messenger before the message, and that's the filter that's being applied. And I have no solution for that. I don't know. That one is as hard to solve as systemic racism to me, and I have no clue where to start. I just think it's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, I agree with that, Scott. I think you're spot on there. And also, Eric, when you mentioned that, there are members of your family who don't want to watch these videos or listen to it on radio, because they just don't want to hear it. I think that is part of the basis of our problem, which leads some people to ask an overarching question, and that's whether the two sides in this country really want to fix this. Do we really want to coexist as one society in and as one country anymore? Or is this not repairable? And if it isn't, what do we do about moving forward? And I'm not as pessimistic as that question sounds. I happen to think that this is in some way repairable, but like Scott, I don't have a specific solution in mind for all of the reasons that the three of us have just outlined. This is a multi-layered societal problem. This is not a problem that has one quick fix. We have become splintered as a society, and we're in a complicated society that's becoming more complex with each passing day, or given technology, maybe each passing hour, who knows? And it seems to me that is moving much faster than our problem-solving abilities. And I really don't know. I like Scott, I don't know how to fix that.
Well, I think there's an element of psychology. I mean, literally, I have offered with a particular cousin, I will watch 10 of the videos that you send me if you watch one of mine, and he won't even do that. I mean, I'm just, I have always, respected the conservative position. I find some of it fascinating, some of the thought fascinating, actually. I've read commentary, the National Review. I think it's gone downhill a little bit, but there are a lot of others that haven't. Human Events and the rest, because I want to hone my own what I believe. I want to kind of clarify, and it has changed my mind on a few things. Maybe not the whole issue, but some aspect of it and how I should look at it. I mean, there's so much there to read. We shouldn't be afraid that it's going to change our mind, but there is a definite fear of getting outside of your zone of comfort. Like, oh my God, are my friends, loved ones and neighbors going to think the same of me if I change my mind on this, right? That I've joined the other side. I think there's a fear of that. I think we've got so much into these. I think that there probably are ways of addressing. I think we need to have a little bit more critical thinking in the curriculums of the schools. I mean, one of the exercises I did as a substitute teacher was to say, okay, here's an opinion, abortion or whatever. I want you to fill the first page with your opinion. And then they would do it, and that would be real easy. And then I say, now I want you to turn over the paper and pretend like you are an advocate and you have a different position, the opposite position. I want you to argue for that position as best you can. It was really hard for students to do that, to actually approach it from the mind of somebody else, even go through the motions of it. Some of them did it quite well. I was really impressed. Others, it was really hard. One girl said, I don't know, there's no good arguments. I'm like, well, then just, write down the arguments you've heard. I mean, try to do it from that position. And it's something that we would have to work through. And I spent the whole time in the classroom saying, okay, well, if you had to argue this point, what would it be? And it's difficult. And sometimes it was just on not even on political issues. Just you make up your mind about certain things. So there's certain aspects of our psychology that maybe hasn't caught up with our technology. And now that it's so clear, and anyway, I think that we have to try to do that, to try to invite people to have discussions about it. I know there's an exercise where you actually repeat what somebody has said in your words until you've got, and then they'll say, no, you don't quite have it right, and you keep saying it until you got it right, and then you respond. I mean, those exercises are good, but What do we do on the mass level? I don't know either. I'm looking for solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric, it reminds me and maybe you and Scott remember this as well. There was a time when the conservative columnist George Will, who I rarely agree with, but I always try to read. And a while back, he wrote a column that he took a lot of heat about because it turned out that George Will and a U.S. Senator from New York at the time, the late Daniel Patrick Moynihan, were very good friends. In fact, their families were friends. They had dinner often. Sometimes they vacationed together. And Will wrote an article trying to encourage Moynihan not to retire. And so conservatives jumped on him and said, we want Moynihan out of the Senate. And he said, no, we don't, because we need to talk to people who we do not agree with. And the reason for it is that it forces us to reconsider our own stands on virtually everything and reconsider things that we thought we believed in. And the idea there is that if we can talk to each other, even when we don't agree, the chance of arriving at a place neither of us would have arrived at on our own is good. And that's what we want. That's how we make progress as a collective society. So you're right. We do need to talk to people that we don't necessarily agree with.
All right. I don't want to suggest that there was any kind of a golden age when we were all, when all discourse has been polite. There have been rude people in debate all the time. Scott, but do you remember a time, how do you remember it being better?
I don't personally remember it being better because I don't remember even hearing it. All I heard was just what I went to school with, and we were all real cool with each other. We were all different and stuff, but we were respectful to other people, and it wasn't until we're able to make our peer group a whole lot bigger online and participating in groups that I personally was exposed to a lot of different viewpoints. Of course, being born and raised in McKinleyville is a rather insular experience, being raised with fishermen and people who work in the woods. That's pretty solidly Republican versus a lot of the people that may have been raised in the urban areas, metropolitan areas, and then moved up here. And then, well, of course, when I moved to Arcata, I was in a whole different environment. I had to learn how to coexist there. And but the way I was raised was to listen to everybody with an open mind, and my mom and my dad both did that, and so I'm able to actually listen to the message without regarding the race or the other politics that they're espousing. I'm listening to the message that they're putting forth at that very moment. I think that the reason that the right in particular is so scared, and to the left slightly less, is because they're scared. They're experiencing fear. We know that anger comes from fear, and usually fear of two types: fear of losing something that you have, or fear of not getting what you want. Mm-hmm. And for the right, it is fear of losing what they have, and that is what they would consider to be their moral standpoint and the way things used to be in the good old days. And the left fear that they aren't going to get what they want, and that is their version of equality. But right now they're going about it the wrong way. They're trying to force equality, and when you do that, you're going to get pushback. And I don't think that there's anything that we really can do other than just education and just letting the generations play out until we're once again on a more level playing field overall.
It's kind of funny. You mentioned that, Scott. When I was a kid, I was surprised to learn when I was about 10 or 11 years old that people actually referred to themselves as conservatives. Up until that point, I always thought it was like a derogatory term that people on the left referred them to, because I would hear, some family member or friend say, "Oh, that damn conservative," I mean, it was interesting. And so that was an eye opener to me at that time. But it's not that I didn't know conservatives, and my whole block was filled with them, but I didn't ever hear them say, "Oh, we are a conservative family," or "I am a conservative." It was really interesting to learn that. So we all have our own experiences about it, and yeah, we do have to figure out how we're going to accomplish. You mentioned, that we have our version of equality and what it looks like and the rest, and that is absolutely what that's going to look like is a discussion we need to have and find out a way to have it in such a way. There used to be panel discussions of that sort. You used to go up, okay, what are the issues that we have to resolve? And there would be a big room full of people, and you'd get people from different sides. Sometimes there were more than two sides, right? And each panelist would get to discuss things, and people would get to come up and ask questions. I don't see much of that anymore. I haven't seen it at universities. Anyway, when we come back, we will follow up with this discussion.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
So Chuck, I mean, what do you remember about discourse before we got to this state of wherever we're at? I mean, do you think it was better in the 60s, 70s, or 80s?
I think it was at least something that people thought they had to do, and that is discuss issues with people who don't necessarily agree with them in at least some sort of civil manner. A lot of us were brought up to say yes sir and no sir and yes ma'am and no ma'am, and just to be respectful of people. And we used to think about things like content of character, and there was a lack of meanness. Whether it was sincere or not, I don't know, but we did have public discussions. I can remember there was a time when I worked in a state legislature, and there were people, members of the legislature, who really did not like each other, but they held meetings, they held discussions, and they made progress on issues that were difficult, but they still got things done. That's what's not happening now. The meanness that exists in society now is preventing government from delivering the services that it needs to deliver. But as far as politics being a rough and tumble sport, we could go all the way back to the founding of the country and what were called broadsides at the time that were just generated to smear people on one side or another. So the rough part of politics has always been there, but there was always on both sides a desire to get the basic things done so that society continues to operate in an efficient manner. And that's what's lacking right now. And this may go back to what Scott was saying earlier about anonymity. It could be that people have become so accustomed to being able to say whatever they want to in an anonymous way online that maybe we've forgotten how public discourse should unfold. And so maybe we need to relearn that.
People do learn that online, and especially on Facebook. People are on social media so much. It's become an integral part of them. And sometimes they forget when they get out in public and get into real life that they're seeing an actual person. They're not seeing an image on their screen or something like that. And they do end up stepping in it. It's a very, very real identity that they've created for them. When you create an online persona, it's really hard to break out of it sometimes when you are not online, or and the worst part about it is that you carry these falsehoods into your brain, and they're reinforced there by repetition day in and day out. And you actually start believing the lies that you make up. And, pretty soon, if you're going to ever start to know yourself again, you have to start peeling the layers of those onions back. And that actually takes counseling, and some serious counseling for a lot of people who have an online addiction.
I think about, civility and discussion, though. And around the 80s or 90s on C-SPAN, they started to show us the British Parliament sessions, and they would go through where they're insulting each other and they're laughing and the rest. And I thought, boy, how can they even work with each other? But one thing I did notice about it was when somebody was insulted, they also tended to laugh. This was, I think, a ritual to let off steam, and probably still do it. And they probably all understand the rules, the lines that you don't cross with it and the rest. So, there is time for good, lively argument. I mean, Buckley, I mentioned earlier in the show, okay, he was really arrogant. Sometimes what he said was really funny, right? And you laughed with it. And, sometimes he got his butt kicked in debates. I watched one with Noam Chomsky. He just was completely outclassed, wasn't ready for it, and he was a good sport about it. I mean, it just was, he was like, okay, next time I'll be ready for you, kind of a thing, So, so we do have discourse that is not polite. We've had the McCarthy era. We've had, everybody says, oh, the 60s was the era of riots. There were a lot of riots in the 30s too. And granted, there was a depression going on, but there have been riots, lynchings, and all sorts of things. So I don't really want to suggest that there's ever been an idyllic part of this. There have been times when one side or both sides really wanted to shut the other side down. But I don't think we've had this identity where you are so much of a caught up that you can't change even the smallest aspect of what you believe without feeling like you're compromising your soul. And that's a psychology I don't know how we get through, but other than just try to have discussions.
Eric, you make a good point there, and it reminds me that in the early days of computer technology, there was so much hope that because of the capabilities, as we saw them at the time, of the online sphere, people would get to know each other worldwide and learn that we do have more in common than what separates us. In fact, what has happened, it has driven us into smaller insular groups, that have their own identities. And I really don't know how to break that spell, but it does seem to be, and all three of us have mentioned this type of thing in different ways during this discussion, and I don't know how we find a pathway out of that. It seems to me that it's going to require a desire on the part of society writ large to fix this. I'm not sure one person or one group, certainly not one party, is going to lead the way out of this. I think, as some have suggested, and Scott alluded to this earlier, maybe it's a matter of time. Maybe it's a generational thing. And we can only hope that we all survive until that happens with our sanity intact. But I'm not sure that there's going to be one magic wand wave that's going to fix this. It's going to take a desire on a large scale to move past all this.
Okay, I agree with you too, Chuck. And one thing is that there still is there still is repercussions and everything from whatever you say, even online. And what Eric was saying earlier about there used to be lynchings and physical repercussions back in the day. Now we have cancel culture, we have public shaming, and this and that can do a whole lot of damage. People are really scared of that, and that tends to stifle discussion, because every group, every subgroup, like you had mentioned, Chuck, they all claim the moral high ground. And when you claim the moral high ground, it means I'm right and you're wrong, and that's the end all be all of it. And either you acquiesce to my position, or there's going to be no more discussion, and we're going to take you down in whatever way, shape, or form that they deem most effective.
Scott, can I ask you a quick question just based on just to follow up on that? Do you think that is what has caused the shrinking of the middle? In other words, you're right, I'm wrong, and there's nothing left in between? Is what you're talking about the cause of the fact that there are so few people left in what we used to call the center?
I don't think that there is too many people, too much in the center. I can claim that I try to be in the center, but when it comes to certain arguments, I will take sides. I'll take a left side, or I'll take a right side, which usually results me being ostracized by both sides.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but you know what? It's exactly in the middle sometimes where you can at least make some progress. Maybe not everybody gets exactly what they want, but at least we take one step forward towards something that needs to get done, because our to-do list in this society is just growing and growing and growing because we're unable to work together.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that 100%.
I think one of the things we have to do is that there have to be individuals who kind of stand up within the given movements. I actually think that Ms. Cheney is not done. I actually think she knew what she was doing. If she wanted to shut up and kind of say, she wouldn't even have to have repented. She could have shut up and stopped talking about, what she was doing. I think she did this on purpose, knowing that this has happened so that she can go back, start some type of organization that says, we need to not have, because the stand is she's making isn't even just against Trump, it's against monolithic politics, right? And we, and on the left, we need to do that too. I mean, one of the mantras you hear in the quote unquote woke movement, I don't want to use terms, that are too easy to be dismissive about, but they say that, people, white people especially, but people in general, are afraid to have the difficult discussions. They're afraid to face their inner racism or whatever. And it's like, I've had so many difficult discussions over the 40 years I've been involved in politics. They're not even difficult anymore. If somebody raises a point and I was insensitive in a certain way, I learn from it. If they're wrong, they're wrong. I don't worry about somebody categorizing me. So trying to be really defensive about something like that is counterproductive. I think, if somebody says, I think you have acted in a racist manner, I haven't gotten that accusation much later, but when they have, I'll say, talk to me, tell me, and then have the discussion. They don't like it if I respond, if I say, well, I have a different way of looking at it. Not always, but sometimes they do. And so it's like, I think we should say, particularly within the left, we say, I'm willing to have the difficult discussion. Let's have them. But the problem is online, I start to have them and then they disappear. They'll make their accusations. I will counter it and, or counter it with something else, and then they're gone. I mean, just absolutely. And I'm not even talking about people of color. I'm talking about white people who are taking, a stand that you don't do certain things or say certain things or take certain positions because it's inherently racist. And one of the things that as I've said on past shows, we got to get rid of is this notion that anybody who voted for Trump is either racist or comfortable with racism. It's not true. We need to stop saying it. And saying that kind of a thing is actually part of what got Trump into power. I don't want to oversimplify it, but the very interesting thing about 2020's election, as we've discussed, is Trump actually gained support with every racial group except whites, where he lost support. I mean, that's how he lost the election. Was he lost something like 12 or 13% of the working class white vote, lost a lot of white women in the suburbs, and the rest. So we need to think about that. Why is that Why did that happen? Are all those people of color who voted sellouts, or and maybe it's because they don't fully understand the politics of the situation, whatever. We can say that, but maybe they have reasons for how they voted the way they did, and maybe we need to address that. Chuck, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And just, listening to what you just said there and thinking about our discussion as a whole, it makes me think that maybe the solutions we're looking for, that is the ability to talk about issues that are important to society, just as far as governance goes, and delivering public services. Maybe that's just going to start locally. Maybe it's not even possible to look at this as something that can be cured nationally. Maybe it's only going to bubble up from the local level and reach a level where most localities, most cities, most states are getting things done because they figured out how to talk to each other once again. Maybe this is not something that can be cured nationally with one stroke of a pen or a piece of legislation. Maybe this is going to be cured at the level where we are, in towns and villages and counties all over the country, where people just decide enough. We have to get something done. Let's be respectful of each other and get the business done that we need to get done. Maybe it's going to have to bubble up from below rather than being cured at the national level.
Scott?
Well, most people are like that. I think that the great majority of the people are kind of, more or less in the middle, and they're willing to listen and work. But what you hear from is the ultra vocal minorities on either end of the spectrum. And those are the ones that get the news because they make the most noise. They're the ones that get people to tune into their stations and make their advertisers more money. Those are the ones that get newspapers sold so they get the coverage. And so maybe it's not as bad as any of us think. And also, coupled with that, there is still a very real thread of cancel culture. I know that that's what they call it when the left is doing it. I think that they have something. I'm not certain of the term, but I know that it's a real thing on the right too. And I don't have an answer for that unless the middle starts to speak up just as loud as the extremists on either end.
Or independent-minded people in the left or right. I mean, people who want to, do that within that framework. I mean, yeah, cancel culture we're referring to as a very recent thing, but the Hollywood blacklist during the McCarthy era, that was cancel culture, obviously, right? So everybody's got it. Everybody, the desire to control what other people think is kind of natural. Maybe all of us have a little bit of it, but the point is we don't want to have it be such a culture that so that's what's expected. And people are like saying, well, I'm afraid to speak up or I'm going to be labeled this. It's for me, the concern isn't that there's going to be negative consequences for saying the wrong thing. It's what it does to the discussion. And we need to be able to have a free flow exchange of ideas. I mean, it's people. I get labeled all the time too. People on the right will say you're a socialist, and I'm like, okay. And then I'll go to people on the left and say, well, they say I'm a socialist. Yeah, it's socialist. You're a revisionist sellout, right? So it's just no matter what, I can't win, right? There's going to be something that I've done when I'm like, fine, I don't care, I don't need a label, right? It's either way. But we used to be able to. There was a time when we could at least have a discussion, at least in academia. And I will fault the left for having kind of taken over a lot of academia and limited the discussion. I'm not a fan of Milo, what's his name, who would say things that got people doing violence. But I also don't think that, it's a good idea to bar him. If for no other reason that you're giving authorities the power to bar something, and if they decide at a certain point that you get some bureaucrats in the university who just doesn't want to deal with anything, they won't let anybody with any controversial opinion speak. It'll all just be mush. And the rest. Same. So I think it's a big mistake. Show up, argue the point with them, and do the point. Boo if you want. Just don't do it to the point that you're disrupting the discussion. But have the discussion. What people didn't understand is Milo thrived on that. He actually benefited from it. I mean, he was drawing out the very reaction that he wanted to advertise to his followers. Right now, he overplayed his hand, and he's in a little bit of trouble now. But
yeah, I agree with you, Eric. One of the things I worry about is our political class and its zeal for power and its zeal to make a lucrative career out of politics. That leads them to make decisions that just work politically, whether they're right or wrong for society. They work politically, and so you end up with the politics of fear, and that further divides us. So there are a lot of fundamental changes I think we need to make to our political system at all levels. Before we can even begin to address some of these foundational problems that we're talking about.
No, I agree. Scott, obviously, you don't know, there are no big solutions, but, on the small level, what can we do as individuals, do you think, as to how to undermine all this?
Well, what we can do as individuals is just recognize the fact that what people's opinions of us are none of our business. And you have to really keep that in mind. People's opinions of you aren't going to hurt you. And I don't know. I go back. This goes back to the moral relativism that Alan Bloom wrote about, and I really have no solution other than just trying to be a good person, trying to listen to the person and their message rather than size up the messenger and to hold that prejudice or litmus test to their message. The message has to be spoken and it has to be evaluated on its face value rather than on who says it or what groups they associate with or who their friends are, or what kind of car or a large pickup they drive, et cetera, et cetera.
I would agree. I mean, we have, again, the tendency to label things. We need to distinguish between actual fascists or actual, violent radicals and people who maybe share some values with them. We have, and there are definitely, we don't want to be tolerant of hate and the rest. I still think, I sort of take that old ACLU position that you got to let them speak, but you don't have to engage that. You don't have to engage the hate. So then backing off of that, we can't say that somebody who believes in the flat tax is obviously a fascist, and they're I mean, and bunching them together. I mean, that's an extreme example. I don't think I've ever heard that, but it's but it definitely. There's different degrees of things, and definitely we all need to kind of look at ourselves and the way we're communicating to make sure that we aren't hurting somebody. And because somebody who has been insulted their whole life in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you say something and it hurts them, I want to learn how not to hurt them. So that's what I want to hear is how do I avoid? It's easy for me to say sticks and stones because I don't even care half the time what people think of me, when it's negative, unless it's somebody I care about, right? But maybe that's not true for everybody. Maybe there are people whose dignity has been beaten down so much to a certain degree, and that's why they support extremes and the rest. And maybe there are ways to communicate where we can avoid reinforcing that by playing right into what they think of us in terms of we're intellectual elitists and don't take them seriously, or some other aspect of it. And it means we got to watch our own language, in a lot of different ways. But that should be on us. Anyway. Well, I think I want to wrap it up real quickly. I would like to continue this discussion, and maybe we can focus on certain aspects of it in the future. But it is time for predictions. Chuck?
I'm going first, huh? Okay, two quick predictions here. One, I think Liz Cheney will run for president in 2024, and I think that that's exactly where she's headed, is a candidacy for president in 24. That's one. The second one, though, has to do with a discussion I was having with our producer, Matt, earlier today, and here it is. This will be the year that the city of Oakland and the A's figure out a way to get the A's a new stadium so that they can stay in Oakland where they belong and where they are needed. This will be the year.
Okay, well that is a bold one. Scott, what do you got?
I got to kind of agree with Chuck about Liz Cheney. I think that even though she's a lower level than the president of the United States, she still has handlers, and she's going down as a martyr to rise again. So I got to support him on that one. My prediction is that it doesn't matter what President Biden does. There is going to be some inflation happening because of his stimulus packages and the way he's going about things. And the only thing that's going to slow this down is a heavy hand by the Fed.
Okay, well, I've actually got a related one because I'm not sure that inflation is happening or whether or not this is just a bump in prices because of a convergence of things. Obviously, the semiconductor issue and the pipeline and price of gas going up is an issue. But I do think that Biden is going to watch that, and I think what he's been pushing hard on the other bills that involve a lot of spending money. I think he's going to use this meeting that they had, the bipartisan meeting, as an excuse to slow it down at least until the May report of April comes out to see where we're headed with inflation, and then he may tailor the spending accordingly if there is going to be an issue of inflation to avoid having to put interest rates up. Although I think the interest rates have been so low for so long, we haven't had inflation since before the 08, collapse. So before we do it, there are signs that inflation can certainly happen, especially if wages do go up because employers have to attract them. But I think it's such a complicated issue, and trying to prognosticate, what's going to happen with the economy is always a problem. But anyway, I do think Biden is going to slow down until he sees whether or not the inflation is a trend. Mm-hmm. Anybody want to quickly respond?
No, I would just say I think we've made it through an hour having a relevant civil discussion, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, isn't that something?
Yeah.
How could that happen? It's not supposed to happen that way.
It's amazing that seems like news, that people can actually have a discussion. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott, for joining us. And again, we will be back for Redwood Wonk. Until next time, keep thinking.